Good morning. My name is Bill Brown, and this is now the fifth session in the Science, Art, and Religion series. Next week, we're going to be talking about uncertainty in science and life, and that's a very key one. That's going to involve maybe 20 minutes of video, a selection from Bronowski's 1973 series on the Ascent of Man. It was a BBC series. Anyway, the first slide here is a picture of my wife and I and our favorite aircraft, which had a range of about 1,000 nautical miles. But I was just thinking, I put this slide in because flying is a combination of an art-like experience as well as being technologically demanding. There's a science component to it, weather, those kind of factors. But I'll tell you, there's nothing like that experience when the wing starts to produce lift and that kind of transition point where the weight is on the runway and then it isn't. And of course, the beauty with low-level flight, meaning something under 10,000 feet, is all the beauty that you see in nature. Sometimes in the fall, fleets, birds, migrating birds, fortunately well below your cruising altitude, at least so far. Anyway, it's a beautiful way to get around, and a good way to start this. Well, so this is science is very much a story in progress. And I'll get back to this later, but most creation stories are more or less fixed in time at the time of their creation, maybe with some modification as time's gone on, and most of them have evolved and in some way, but science really changes with time, meaning our understanding of the natural world and life and how we behave. That has changed a lot. I want to acknowledge Debbie Krause's contribution to this because I wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be here without the Niagara Lake Library, and that means Debbie Krause. So thank you to Debbie. Now, there was a beginning to this series back in 2010 because I put together a talk on the relationship between religion, the brain, and science, and it was a talk I gave in Boston, a couple of other places in the U.S., in Toronto, and actually at St. Bart's at one time. And but anyway, that tweaked my interest, and this is the story 12 years long. Well, just to remind you that beauty is also part of this talk, and remember these really spectacular displays of northern lights that were seen in Scotland and actually in the southern UK, in Brighton, if you like. And they're really the effect of, from the science part of it, the interaction of the Earth's magnetic field with charged particles originating from the sun. But boy, quite aside from the science of them, isn't it just stunningly beautiful? It's amazing. As is, of course, a picture of the Milky Way seen at night, and the heavens are kind of lit up. This is around on an island close to the equator, but look, it's just absolutely stuffed with stars, and therefore systems like our own. It's almost impossible to count them. And this is only a small fraction of the Milky Way, which has around, and the estimate would be 200 billion stars. So let's look at the creation story from science from several aspects. First of all, I suppose the biggest contribution in this area from science was that there was in fact a beginning to the universe. It began as something very tiny, very dense, and probably pure energy. And in less than a second, actually trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second, if we can believe mathematical models, inflated much faster than the speed of light to become something maybe perhaps Milky Way sized within that trillionth of a trillionth of a second. It's almost unbelievable, isn't it? And within a few seconds, all the elementary forces and particles came into being. So that's point one and point two. The first generation of stars appeared within a few 100 billion years. Perhaps we'll find evidence of an even earlier generation of stars. Hydrogen and helium and a tiny bit of lithium were created in the Big Bang, but all of the other elements were created in the cores of stars by pressure and intense temperatures in the cores of stars, which creates lighter elements, including all of the elements that are so key to life: carbon, oxygen, phosphorus, nitrogen, and sulfur, and of course hydrogen, which was created in the Big Bang. But there's an end to fusion creating elements at about iron. Beyond that, you need much higher pressures and temperatures, and that happens in supernova explosions, which involve a kind of collapse, a core collapse, and a collapse of the shell of the star, and then a reflective blast heading out into the universe, blasting all of those elements into the neighborhood of that former star, to be picked up possibly by new stars on the make. And for the heaviest elements, such as gold, they're made in the collision of neutron stars, where the temperatures, when they collide, are extremely high, as are the pressures, and capable of making things like gold and titanium and many of the other heavy elements. So, or sorry, they meant platinum there, not titanium. So that's another one of the creation stories from science. Here's another one that you'll be familiar with from previous talks of mine, but life began on Earth at least 3.7 billion years ago, possibly earlier, but a few 100,000 years, maybe even earlier. The fact is, we don't know how or where life began. Early cells look simple under a microscope, but they're extraordinarily complex, so there clearly had to be something earlier than that. Life is based on what I just said a few minutes ago, on certain elements: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. The molecules of life include RNA and later DNA, and RNA is provides a template for amino acids, and from a collection of amino acids, proteins are made. And then sugars and lipids are also the other molecules of life. Every life form is based on the same, now this is really important, every life form is based on the same molecular building blocks, or blueprint, if you like. And every form of life is related to every other form of life at the molecular level. So we are related to every other species, no matter what it looks like, in some fashion, and how far back or deep that connection is. But we are related to all other carbon-based life on this planet. Anyway. Now, what about the story about the evolution of humans? Well, the last common ancestor was 5 to 6 million years ago. The common ancestor, that is, to the apes and to what would eventually become modern humans. Humans evolved in Africa and became anatomically and physiologically modern about somewhere between 150 to 200,000 years ago, perhaps a little earlier, but not much. Humans are intensely social species. We are also unique among species. We possess well-developed symbolic thought and oral language, and several thousand years ago, we developed script, or written language. Modern humans are imaginative, compulsive storytellers. Modern humans are also aware of death. Now, animals are sometimes aware of death, but it doesn't last long, usually. But humans, that sense of loss may go on for months, years. We mourn. And historically, we developed elaborate burial services, but elaborate burial services, or at least preparation for death, intentional preparation for death, may go back much longer to pre-modern humans, pre-Neanderthals, pre-Denisovans, as much as maybe 500, 600,000 years ago. Like all highly social species, modern humans are aware of fairness, or lack of fairness, or unfairness, and provide long-term care. Modern humans, more than any other species, are capable of great cruelty and destruction of their own and other species, as well as the planet. So we may be good guys and gals much of the time, but not all of the time. Ukraine, Myanmar, you could begin the list now and in the past. Humans also created art, and art early, and some form of religious experience. And that'll be obvious, or that was obvious in the art, some of the artifacts they left behind, the art, especially in the caves. Art that was outside was probably lost because of weather, or much of it was. Modern humans are extraordinarily creative. And something you may not be aware of, humans continue to evolve. And here's a thought. If the evolutionary past of our species can be taken as a prologue, a guideline, for example, for the future, humans might survive several 100,000 years into the future before going extinct or becoming extinct, or evolving, as all of our predecessors have done, into another species, perhaps better fit for whatever future waits the species and the planet. And using gene editing, humans, for the first time, have upended natural selection. Humans can modify their genome to enhance, perhaps, desirable traits. Now, perhaps not now, but the technology exists, or if it doesn't exist, it's very close to existing for that. So we've got ourselves in a bit of a pickle over that. Now, what about the end game? I'm going to say more about that next week. Yeah, let's just leave that to next week. The science story, one of the things about the science story, I mentioned it earlier, just a few minutes ago, but the science story is incomplete. It's evolving. Well, there are questions that remain right now. Precisely what happened, for example, in those earliest moments of the Big Bang? I mean, what was there before? What was there exactly at the moment that it happened? Why did it happen? And what actually happened in that trillionth of a second of inflation of the universe? We don't know. And we don't really have good tools for telling us exactly what happened. What is the nature of dark matter? What is dark energy? How and when will the universe end? Is there the possibility, raised by some theoretical physicists, that there might be alternate universes, or a string of them, and we're part of the string? So when this universe expands to its limit and then collapses, for example, theoretically, at the end, perhaps into a gigantic black hole and singularity, is that the moment that it transitions into yet a new universe? Possible, theoretically possible, anyway. A lot of speculation, and guaranteed we won't be around at the time. How does science move ahead? This is important to understand. Science does a lot of things very, very well, and it gets it right a lot of the time, but sometimes not all right. And what was right at one time, say with Newton's view of the universe and planetary dynamics, their orbits, the laws that govern orbiting planets and stars, it needs some modification. And that came with Einstein's general relativity in 1960. That was a profound change. But in the 1960s, quantum mechanics, the world of the subatomic structures, that had reached a level of maturity that scientists came together in the 1960s. One of the key players was Steven Weinberg, and I'll mention him later, but where they consolidated what they knew about quantum mechanics at the time into a model. And the model worked. And you may recall that the Higgs particle, or the God particle, was discovered a few years ago, but postulated to exist 30 plus years ago by Peter Higgs. And neutrino particles were also thought to be theoretically possible, and they were found. And some of that work was rewarded, or at least was done by a Canadian, and who won a Nobel Prize for that work. Both of those men did. Anyway, so the Standard Model worked. It was very predictive and precise, but it left gravity out. There was no account of dark energy. And quantum mechanics, or at least the Standard Model of quantum mechanics, simply doesn't work with general relativity. Ultimately, those two have to be part of a larger whole, but that hasn't happened yet. And then, when models are put out, scientists deliberately test them. And one of the things they can test for is the accuracy or the precision with which they dictate the mass of some of the particles. And there's been some trouble with that, because two particles, a gluon and the W boson, the theoretical predictions of what the mass should be differ not by much, actually a tiny little bit, but a tiny little bit means a lot to physicists, differs from actual measurements. Well, are the measurements wrong? Are the predictions wrong? Is there something flawed in the standard theory? So that's how science works. We do the best we can to kind of put models together about how things might work and use them for their predictive value or utility. That is, until they don't work, and then we have to change. Which brings me to the next one. How does science work? Observation leads to hypothesis, to testing of that hypothesis, to revision if they don't quite fit. If the data doesn't fit the hypothesis, revision to a new or revised hypothesis, to testing again. In that sense, scientific stories are works in progress. They are never the last word. And one question, for example, what is true for the natural laws in one place in the universe is true everywhere? Well, that's an assumption, but is that true? Science is also, at least for the bigger projects, very international. Science speaks with universal languages. That's certainly true with mathematics. But it doesn't matter whether the paper's in German or French or Japanese or English. The content, the ideas, the calculations, whatever it is, the observations, those are all universal. And always the troubling thing that happens sometimes in life as well, solving one problem, one question, often leads to more questions. And scientists, like all of us, they are human, even the brightest, make mistakes. Albert Einstein made 2 or 4 major goofs in his career. Now, there is beauty in nature, and it's evident in the Milky Way, that picture that I showed you earlier, on a clear night that was highlighted by Alan Lightman, a physicist, a unique one, at Harvard and MIT, where he has joint appointments in physics, but also in the arts. That's really unusual, but we need more of that. Beauty. One thing that you might not be aware of is that beauty is also expressed in the precision with which mathematics describes the motions of heavenly and earthly bodies. For Newton, I mentioned that a few minutes ago. And the relationship between mass and space-time by Einstein. The staggeringly precise predictions in the face of uncertainty in the quantum universe, symmetry in the quantum universe, the laws of thermodynamics, and the fundamental simplicity of self-replicating molecules in life. Well, there's that Milky Way. It's really beautiful. It's a truly dark night, meaning not a lot of background light from cities and traffic and other sources, but just go back here. Yeah, so there's the universe, and this, by the way, is probably a very bright area where the massive black hole in our galaxy resides. And this is an extraordinary one because it comes from the 1990s. One of the Voyager satellites was sent out to the far reaches of our solar system, and from those far reaches was turned around, and a picture taken of Earth. Now, this red band is artifact, but there was Earth, this tiny, tiny little pink or blue dot in the distance, surrounded by thousands and billions, even billions of other stars. And it makes you realize that, or kind of wonder, doesn't it, that all of human history, all of it, from the origins of life, the evolution of life, to the emergence of us and perhaps our successors, all that drama, all the plays, all the stories, all the books, all the information, all the stuff we play with, all the wars, the generals, the peacemakers, all lived on that little dot. And we can't seem to get along on that little dot. It looks so beautiful from space, but we have trouble with that. So, and here's another just reminder with the next one about nature that Darwin pointed out as well, certainly in his original one, The Origin of Species, really talking about natural selection. But there's also another way of selecting, and that's based on sex or attractiveness. And it usually falls to the male to look gaudy colorful, and at least in the birds of paradise in Southeast Asia. Really quite extraordinary displays. I remember as a child being in Gibbons Park in London, Ontario, a peacock. Australian I don't know where it came from, but it fanned out the tail feathers, and wow, what a display, iridescent light. And the same here. So beauty also controls or dictates how evolution progresses, at least for some species. Now, returning to that question of beauty in physics, most physicists prefer theories and hypotheses, especially for theoretical physicists, prefer theories and hypotheses, data and interpretations which are elegant. I mean, there's an underground, there's something beneath this, isn't it? This sense that anything as masterful as the universe has to be elegant, should be elegant, not messy. And general relativity, which was put forward by the relationship between mass and space-time. Stephen Weinberg, that I mentioned earlier, mentioned this. Einstein's general relativity was widely accepted long before it was proven because it was so elegant. Isn't that an interesting statement? And it's probably true. So elegance and symmetrical in nature, and this was we have negative and positive. We also have matter and antimatter. So there's a symmetry there, and something intuitive about it. It should be intuitive. There should be an intuitive aspect to it. That's certainly the way Einstein certainly thought this way, but elegance, intuitive nature, and it should be self-evident. Now, I put Heisenberg and Schrödinger up there because it illustrates this dilemma sometimes. Both of them were trying to solve mathematically what was going on, what dictated the quantum states or the orbits of electrons, and what were the and could that be expressed mathematically? And Heisenberg did so with matrix math, which wasn't intuitive. It wasn't something you could look at and say, gee, I've got a feel for this. I get it. But the math was highly precise, and it worked. Schrödinger came along and looked at this challenge and developed a different math, which was intuitive, which made sense to those people who looked at it. And the two were reconciled by Born, who knew both men quite well. By the way, these two battled away for a time. They weren't too happy with one another. Physicists don't like messy answers, which are not evident. That's true. Now here's an illustration of this. Is there beauty in an equation? Well, this is the key equation in general relativity. And John Wheeler really put it simply. On the left side here, matter tells space-time how to curve, and on the right side, curved space tells matter how to move. Well, it gobbles up less than a third of a line, and yet that expresses the relationship between space-time and mass. That's incredible. It's a very simple kind of idea. It's like his even simpler equation, E is equal to mc squared, where energy and matter are related to one another. realize that they are one and the same, just looking at the equation. And yet the equation is simple. And in that sense, equations, mathematics, is very attractive. There's a beauty to it. Well, I've just put this up because everywhere humans have gone, and this is an example from Argentina, once they began to do this, they were doing it everywhere, the same kind of thing, meaning they were putting their hands on walls and leaving prints of their hands, not of their feet, not of the heads or any other part of the body, not drawing the body, but hands. And some of them were created by putting the hand up against the wall like this and blowing pigment on it and lifting the hand up so the pigment defined the fingers and the thumb and the hand. And other times the pigment was placed on the flexor surface of the fingers and hand and to make the imprint. But this is a universal found in the Far East, found in India, found in the New World, found in Europe, found in Africa. It's a very common thing, probably the most common thing to do on walls. And what you don't see, the extraordinary thing, in these caves, which I consider some of them are like cathedrals in their beauty, the art contained in them, but no one seems to have rubbed anything out. I mean, they weren't constantly occupied by the same group. It might be several hundred years or maybe a couple thousand years, whatever it is, where humans were there, but then it might be occupied by another human group, or perhaps at an earlier time, Neanderthals. But they weren't destructive of what was there. That's amazing to me. This is something I did for my last book, and that's under revision right now. I'm frustrating me a long time. But anyway, I rather like this one because I took the handprint there, picture, and superimposed it on a picture of, I think it's probably the Milky Way, but a great collection of stars to show this connection. I mean, we're the only species, except maybe Neanderthals and Denisovans, to look up and wonder, to have a sense of awe. At least I think we are, maybe the only. Those three. It may have happened earlier. I don't know. But before that, most animals, almost all animals, their attention was glued on what was in front of them, immediately in front of them. No existential questions, no sense of wonder, awe, at least as far as we know. No one's interviewed zebras, to the best of our knowledge. Now I show you this because this is an example of Neanderthal art. One of the, Neanderthals had a bad press for a long time because of their rugged, heavy-boned, heavy-muscled features. So not that you see the muscles, but you can see where they attach, and therefore imply how large the muscle was. So these are heavily boned, kind of shorter, very stout. When people first looked at them with their heavy eye, bony eye, overbrows here, they thought they were dim-witted. And then in more recent decades, there's been quite a rehabilitation of this image of the dim-witted Neanderthal. As we've discovered, they create decorative objects, necklaces, probably body art. They did some, they certainly left their handprints in caves in Europe long before modern humans showed up, 45,000 or maybe 50, as early as 55,000 years ago. But Neanderthals were there well before that and for a long period of time. They managed to survive the ebb and flow of glaciation and cold climate, or major changes in climate. So, but this is an interesting picture because there's some animal, two animals here, but heaven knows what's actually going on the right there. But nothing of the beauty, I'm not knocking it, not of the beauty, but modern humans later created in literally hundreds of caves in Western Europe, but elsewhere as well, Indonesia, Southeast Asia. This wonderful art, and some of it extraordinarily beautiful, such that, oh, here we are. And I mean, look at the sense of movement here of these, they look like cave lions. They're kind of moving to the left. And you can imagine this, now this is the constant light source here, probably incandescent. But what would it have been like with a flickering oil lamp? That sense of movement and awe and perhaps fear might be very real if you were in the confines of a relatively small space. Humans, Neanderthals created the flutes as well, much earlier than humans. But here's what a human one 30,000 years ago. Some of them made from ivory, some of them from bone. But they certainly knew where to put the holes, the distance between the holes, and the size of the holes along the side of the flute. And these flutes have actually been played by experts, and they make quite good music, or sound anyway. It's impressive. Well, what are some characteristics of human traits that kind of have dictated our what we've become and what we are now and what we might become in the future? Well, one is a vivid imagination. It's obvious in the art and on the walls. But one thing, humans and probably Neanderthals, I don't know about Denisovans, and I don't know how far back this impulse goes, but they could create imaginary virtual worlds and connections with animals or forces of nature. They created music. You saw the flute, drums. They had obviously sophisticated symbolic thought and language, not just oral language, but also gesture, probably the two together, to portray elaborate life stories, creation stories, and ceremonies. They possessed a moral sense. That doesn't mean that they behaved that way, but they had a moral sense. But as I mentioned earlier, a sense of the moral is shared by other highly social species, not just humans. We didn't create that. We did create religion. We seem to be the only species, well, with Neanderthals, that created something that we could call a religion. And, especially for modern humans, we disseminated knowledge. Well, modern humans early in the game traded at long distances. So they must have been communicating with people where they wouldn't share language probably, but to their mutual benefit. And spreading the word and exchanging information well beyond their overnight camps of 30 to 50 people, or even their tribe. So modern humans have a lot of gifts, and it's no surprise that we've come to dominate the landscape of the earth. And what about, I don't want to say a lot about this, but there are pros and cons to religion. Well, what are the pros? Well, it certainly provides a social network of shared beliefs and understanding. You could say the same for culture, but yes. And I know that in my own church, the Anglican Church, some people, even those who oppose much of what the church espouses, are what Richard Dawkins calls cultural Anglicans, meaning they really like the English part of the story and the beauty of the prose and the music that came along with it, the music that was part of the service life of the church. And that was very important. It also provided a sense of stability and order, meaning and purpose, and there was a pastoral part of it here, support when needed. What's the con? Pretty obvious. If you have a group that believes, has a common set of beliefs, what happens when they encounter people that don't share those beliefs, or don't share some of them that are considered really important to group one, but not group two? Well, that's where conflict comes. I mean, not just in religion, but other areas as well. But this, I mean, people kind of check that out, don't they? With strangers sometimes, to get some sense of, are these people who think like I, who think like me, who value, have share the same values, and if not, we're a little nervous about and wary about them. So that's tribalism. That's not just a marker for religion, but it's one. And they tend to be very, most of the world's religions tend to be very resistant to change. Now they do change over the centuries on mark, but it tends to be very, very slow, and that may account for their stability. Now, what about feudatory practices? I referred to this earlier. In some cases, meaning signs of deliberate body processing, preparing the body for its burial. And look at how far back, 850, 700. Now this is before the line to the Neanderthals and Denisovans separated from the line that eventually led to modern humans. And that's a long time ago. But the brain here was almost our size then. But there are several of those sites. There's 600,000 years ago, Rising Star Cave, maybe a third of a million years ago. So that's what makes me think that this evolution toward what we would call behaviorally modern humans, or behaviorally modern Neanderthals, was a long time coming. And it was probably many little small steps, and some of them lost, and then regained, refound, or whatever. And it was very halting, but overall movement, but slow. And then it picked up steam as modern humans became more mobile, spread, encountered others of their species, and shared information with them. So I think that cultural, religious, artistic maturity took a long time to take. It took a long time. And the apparent steep rise is a little deceiving. I mean, you look at all that art, that abundance of art in Western Europe, and to a lesser extent in East Asia, Southeast Asia. But what was going on before that? What led to that? Oh, we don't know. It's all dependent on finding artifacts. Well, enough said about religion and burying people. Now, let's move on to this, because this is an interesting thing that you probably heard about. That I remember this when I was a senior intern in health sciences. And I had a friend, since deceased, who was a cardiologist who did a lot of catheter work. So that these patients would have a catheter spread above their heart, and a way of studying the circulation of the heart, looking for blockages, and no stents in those days. But very occasionally, I don't think this ever happened to David, but very occasionally, some of these cardiologists would have experienced the heart would stop. Now, they could get the heart started again, usually within a minute or so, but some of those patients, it wasn't the physicians asking them, but the patients would say, after at least to their family, if not to the physician, who might disbelieve them, but they'd say to the family, well, I had this extraordinary sensation. I felt like I was kind of drifting or rising in the room toward the ceiling, and I could look down on myself and the operating table at the theater, see what was going on. So I had this out-of-body experiences. And there were other people who had near-death experiences that sometimes would describe an intense, bright light, but not a scary bright light. One that they felt they were in for most of them, it was a wonderful feeling. And when they recovered, some of them said they were very reluctant to return. So there were many books published, some of them written by physicians. This is a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife. It's actually a good read, because he was unconscious, unaware, for about a week with, I think it was a bacterial meningitis and encephalitis, and his illness wasn't a 2 or 3 minute affair. But it's an extraordinary kind of thing. And here's another example of this, or some, at least in what causes these out-of-body experiences. Well, here's one. Sometimes, at least with epilepsy surgery, it involves often unroofing the surface of the brain in the area of the temporal lobe, at least in an area where you have some good evidence to think that that's the site of the origin, that's where the origin of the seizures are coming from. And you want to know whether it's safe to operate in certain areas and take out parts of that brain, the epileptogenic sites in the brain. And one way to investigate this is to stimulate the brain, not just record from it, but stimulate the brain. And this is an area of the brain in one subject. This is on the right side of the brain. This is the temporal lobe. So this is the back of the temporal lobe, the upper back part of the temporal lobe, and the lower part of the parietal lobe above it. And when they stimulated in that area, the patient who was awake, in this case, reported something like that out-of-body experience. And using a different technique called functional MRI, in which they're assessing indirectly oxygen consumption, the idea being that more activity in the region, more oxygen is taken from transiting blood, and they kind of light up here. Now this is the flip side. This is the right side of the brain. Right side of the brain right here is going to flip to what you think. You think it's here, but no, it's here. And it's in that parietal posterior temporal region, very similar to the localization with stimulation of in a person who's experiencing an out-of-body experience, and this is where the brain lit up. Now, it wasn't just in the parietal and the inferior parietal and posterior upper temporal lobe. It also involved a region in the brainstem and the medial part of the hemisphere, the so-called cuneus region. So, but these are areas where the brain kind of lit up during these experiences. So this suggests that there is an underlying physiological basis for these sensations. Well, what about, well, this is a crudely put together slide, but I just put together certain traits: imagination, creativity, storytelling, beauty, moral compass, how conservative or liberal people are for science, art, and religion. The one thing that stood out for me is that, yes, imagination and creativity are features of religion, but probably most at their inception, when the story started. Not so much hundreds of years, thousands of years later, when these religions became sometimes state-sponsored and stable and very conservative. I think that would be true in some areas in the Muslim world, for example. Not all by any means, but that would be the same. And it's certainly true in Christianity and some, and in Judaism. All of them, science, art, and religion, have a great sense of imagination and creativity. Storytelling, the stories they tell are different, and the way they express them different. But yes, they're storytellers. They all have a sense of beauty. I don't know about the moral compass in science, but some. And anyway, that's how I would. I don't know how others would weight those. What do prominent scientists have to say? What have they said about religion? Well, there are lots of hundreds, if not thousands, have weighed in on this. But of the prominent ones that I know much about, Albert Einstein probably was the most famous physicist, maybe scientist, of the 20th century. He was very well known. He had that kind of unruly hair, and he looked like a genius, and has been characterized or caricatured as such. But anyway, Albert Einstein, he was from a Jewish family. I don't think they were practicing Jews, but anyway, a Jewish family. He certainly was well aware of the traditions of Judaism. Later, very late in his life, he turned down the presidency of Israel. It's probably a wise thing on his part. But he certainly had a divided interest. But his sense of God, he saw God in the order in the universe. In other words, what the physicists were discovering about the universe and how it worked. And but not a personal God, not one who's going to get involved in my life and my affairs and approve things for me. Brian Greene is also from a Jewish tradition. I think most scientists who are either not interested in the question at all and don't even want to talk about it, not hostile, just not interested in the question about religion. Some are. Roger Penrose, for example, the Nobel Prize winner in 2020 for his theoretical work on black holes, who imagined that there were three central pillars to creation and universe writ large. And one was all the matter and energy with which we're familiar in our day-to-day life. But the second is the world of mathematics, because it most eloquently speaks to the precision with which the universe works. And quantum mechanics and the universe universe writ large of general relativity and in the laws of thermodynamics. Alan Lightman, I referred to earlier, he's a trained physicist and has enjoyed appointment at, I think, MIT and Harvard, but the important thing is it combines teaching physics and art about 50-50. That's a very interesting thing. Stephen Weinberg, I put him up. I rather like him. He's quite brusque, highly intelligent, political in the sense that it was a great fundraiser for science and meetings with Congress. But he didn't like religion at all. He thought it was, and long essays about that. So, I think quite hostile. Einstein was anything but hostile. I mean, there were many letters written to him from children, adults, who looked to him for guidance. Well, what's this all about? What about God? What's the nature of God? And he was very generous with his time about that. And we might talk about that later. Now, I put this up the last slide, not because I'm going to say anything. I thought this was going to be the last in the series. It wasn't, simply not enough time. This is the canary in the room as an artificial intelligence. I mean, it's gone from 0 to almost, some would say, out of control because of the design and improvement in computers and the software. I mean, it's the way to go for determining the composition of amino acids and the linkages in proteins. It has many, it offers many benefits for medicine. Anyway, it's a real challenge to humans because at some point, its intelligence is going to reach something very close to ours or even exceed ours. And I say that in a general sense. I mean, it's always been very good in its early development about beating humans at games like chess and other games, but a more comprehensive intelligence equivalent to ours that we thought that was far off, but it's turning out to, in some cases, being quite good linguistically with language, and getting reads from our face and our gestures about what we're thinking and our mood and feeling. So, and that's in less than what, 30 years, where the main, or 20 years where that spike was really going up. There's a lot of hype involved for this, but clearly it's some people see it as a threat, and in a way it is. And then we're next week. This is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about our future in a little more time, but the main thing is going to be about uncertainty in science and life. There was a BBC series in 1970, 1973 called The Ascent of Man, and it was done by Jacob Bronowski, a mathematician trained at Cambridge University, Polish origins, very elegant man, a student of the history of science, and this was a magnificent series. So I'm going to play a very selected part of it, part 11, and a third of that. So that's what's on next week, and that'll challenge you. It certainly challenges me. Well, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you next week, and right now, for this particular one, I'm talking to an empty room because we had to redo this one. So all the best, and look forward to seeing you for the 6th one. And we'll carry on. Thank you.